Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be painting a winter wreath decoration and I'm going to be using my Saunders Waterford cold pressed paper. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorators or any old masking tape just bought cheap from eBay. And my board's at an angle of about 45 degrees, and if you saw at the beginning, I have drawn around a small plate on my paper in pencil just to give me the rough guide of a nice circle so I don't get lost when I start to paint my intertwined leaves and foliage and berries. I'm wanting to end up with a nice loose painting with lots of lost and found edges, soft and hard edges, and nice tonal contrasts, but no fussy detail. But I will stop part way through and suggest a point for anybody to continue and finish the painting off if they prefer a slightly more detailed approach. Now the first thing I'm doing is I'm using a small synthetic mop brush and I'm painting in leaves here and there in different shades of sap green, and then I'll move to perylene green. I'm just flicking leaf shapes in using the brush. The brush is a lovely shape. It's a Polina Bright brush. It's lovely. It was a gift, so I don't have a link for it, I'm afraid, but I'm sure that any round or calligraphy brush or a small mop brush would do for flicking out these kinds of shapes. As you can see, I'm trying not to get them too regular. I'm trying to imagine how little sprigs of leaves would intertwine or sit next to each other on a sort of wreath, and so I'm just trying to go backwards and forwards, slightly darker paint here, lighter paint there, larger and smaller leaves, so I'm creating quite a variety of sort of similar shapes and sizes so that there's a sort of balance and a harmony growing as I fill out my wreath shape with all these little leaves. And you can see that I'm not laboriously painting each leaf. I'm letting the brush do the work, placing the brush onto the page and just flicking it out. You need a fairly inky consistency, well pigmented but quite runny consistency of paint to be able to get this effect. So if you try doing a leaf and you find it's not working, the paint's too thick, just add a little bit more water to it. Sometimes it's good to have a piece of scrap watercolour paper next to your board so you can try your mixtures out before committing to the page. And as I said at the beginning, if you prefer a more sort of detailed wreath, then stop at this stage, or rather continue building up more leaves and then painting in some berries in your chosen red or orange. But I'm going to carry on and turn this painting into a sort of wet in wet loose wreath. But if you prefer the more detailed look, that's the point to stop, i.e. don't use the water spray. So I'm using my water mister, and you can see that some of my paint is beginning to run and diffuse, and I'm going into the wet areas and continuing to build up my leaves. I'm looking for some sort of really soft, washy patches of colour here and there. I don't mind that I'm losing some of my leaves. I can put them back in later. What I'm looking for is those beautiful shadowy shapes and diffusions and unique colour blends and tonal blends that you get on the page when you allow wet in wet and water spray to really kind of do its own thing. And with the board at an angle of 45 degrees, you can see things are running down really nicely. I can blot out with a tissue if I want to. I can tilt my board to get the run going in any other direction. I can lay it flat if I'm happy with the shape. And now this is my vermilion. It's a Royal Langnickel vermilion, and it's a lovely red. it's closer to orange, but I think it works perfectly with these greens. So I'm just spattering on and flicking on some colour in little patches here and there, and that's diffusing nicely into the Wet in Wet green paint, which, as I said earlier, is sap green. That's Jackson's own brand, and Winsor & Newton perylene green. So the top was looking a little bit flat, so I've turned the board upside down and I'm just spraying that with some water to get that area to run a little bit more. Then once I'm happy with that, I'll turn it round again, and you can see that I've managed to get some bit more interest and a bit more life into that area, but I've kept a lot of the hard edges of my leaf shapes here and there, but now I'm getting these beautiful soft diffusions where the greens and the oranges are all running in together. So now I'm going to lay my board flat so that I don't get any downward run anymore, and where I've got some large pools of water and paint, I'll carefully dab away here and there with a bit of tissue, and I'm creating slightly different textures where I lift out the paint and a bit more light, but I'm also getting rid of those really big pools of water that will just continue to sort of run around on the page if I don't mop them up. I'm now going to go back in while the page is flat, and I'm going to look at the wreath and see where I think it needs a few more defining leaves before I leave this layer to dry. This is, to all intents and purposes, the underpainting, and it's going to be doing a lot of the hard work for the painting. There's not going to be much detail that will be needed, hopefully, if I can get the underpainting right. So you can see there that I've now added a few sort of stems into the picture, and I'm doing a few more here and there. I'm using my small calligraphy brush and just putting these curved lines following the shape of the circle and the wreath and the position of the leaves. And because it's all still damp and wet in places, I'm getting some nice soft diffusions here and there where the paint is meeting the damp paper. I'm just strengthening up those patches of vermilion, spattering a little bit more here and there, just to make sure that I've got enough red glowing against the greens for this layer. And I'm now going to leave it to dry completely, and once it's dry I'll come back and put on a final layer of leaves, which should hopefully finish the painting off. So now that it's dry, I'm going to continue working in exactly the same way with exactly the same colours that I've been using to build up a top layer. But this time I'm not going to use very much, if any, of the water spray, but I'm using the same technique of creating the leaves with sap green and perylene green, varying shades, to flesh out and fill out this wreath a little bit more with detail. Now, most of these edges here that I'm painting will be hard edges, apart from where the leaves meet each other, where they will then soften a little and join, so that you'll get a joined shape of several leaves together, which will be a little bit softer. But I'm looking for the hard edges against the softly diffused underpainting here to bring the wreath together. And there's no set way to do this. It will depend on where you've placed your leaves, how big they are, how much diffusion you got with the wet in wet technique, as to where you'll put your leaves now. There's no rush for this stage because it's not like wet in wet where there are time limits. You can sort of take your time and keep stepping back and looking at the wreath and making sure that it's looking balanced. If there are any areas that don't have enough leaves, then it's good to pay attention to those. or if you just want to break up maybe something that's looking a bit too symmetrical or a bit too ordered, with a sort of little bit of, like I'm doing here, of much smaller leaves and dots and things, for just a smaller twig and foliage of leaves just sort of dangling down in the middle. So this is the small calligraphy brush, which is great for dotting in and dashing these kind of little random brush strokes that just sort of suggest detail and smaller leaves. And finally, I think, unless I want to do any more to it, just really rich, dark perylene green leaves, just to give us some nice depth and dimension to this wreath. I'm being careful that I don't want to place too many of these darker leaves on, but I do want them to be some of the largest leaves here, but leaving plenty of the smaller and paler leaves showing through between them. And then also putting in some darker accents to the areas of smaller sized leaves and dots. I think it's worth practicing these leaf shapes on a scrap of paper to start with, to make sure that you've chosen the right brushes for the job, because here I think it's the beauty of this wreath is down to the very fresh, expressive brush strokes that create the shapes, rather than laboriously trying to paint like hundreds of tiny leaves little by little. So if you just go through your brushes and just try a few out and just find the ones that work the best for you for creating those lovely leaf shapes sort of quickly and easily, and that will keep your painting looking lovely and fresh. And I think this is where the cotton paper really helps, because you can build up lots of layers on it, and the wet in wet diffusions are really pretty, rather than ending up muddy. And you can get some lovely granulation here and there where you've used a lot of water for the washes. Just a few last accents with the vermilion here and there. If anything goes on too bright, you can dab it out with a tissue. And you notice I'm deliberately not painting berry shapes. You can if you want to, but I'm looking for my berries to be sort of suggested through spatter and just light dotting here and there with the vermilion. So a final bit of spatter with the vermilion. I find often I get better spatter if I tap the brush with a very loose, inky consistency, quite liquid solution of paint. I get the kind of size droplets that I need just to finish this sort of thing off. So I think I'm happy with that. I'm going to call that one finished, and remember, if you paint something like this large, you can always print it out smaller and then make Christmas cards with the printouts. I'm removing the tape, pulling it away from the painting so that I don't risk tearing the paper. If you have difficulty removing tape from your paper, use a hairdryer over the tape and warm it up a little bit first, and that usually releases the glue so that you can then remove the tape without damaging the painting or the paper. And now looking at it with fresh eyes, I just think I need a few darker leaves over this side just to finish it off. So that's two styles of wreaths there. So don't forget, if you prefer a more detailed wreath and if you want to continue and add in different, maybe some flowers or some baubles and decorations, then stop just before I start using the water spray. But with this one, where I've used the water spray, I'm really enjoying the kind of soft diffusions and all the different colour blends that have come from just using this limited palette of 3 colours: vermilion, perylene green and sap green. Thanks so much for watching. I hope it was useful. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to my lovely Patreon group who support this channel. And I'll see you again soon. And happy painting. Bye.